I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
Level with us. Hello, and welcome to the show where we have a cozy video game discussion almost every week. And it has been a good long while since we got together, so we're going to talk about some really great indie games. We're going to talk about a very specific, very cool indie game console called the Playdate. But before we do, Marcus, it's been an eternity. How are you?
I'm just so good. I'm just great.
I heard there was a very, very big change in your life that will never be the same again. You got a cat.
I got a cat. Yep.
Wow.
After all the video games we've played that have cute little kittens in them, finally I have a real one.
Well, how's CatLife? How's that treating you?
It's good. I understand cat people a lot better now. I understand why they say the silly things that they say, like, oh, my cat's a handful. Stuff like that.
I'm glad you can finally relate to them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and you got married or something as well.
Oh, yeah, that's how I got the cat. No.
Right.
Life's been great, but I'm really happy to be back here. This is great too.
It has been a hot minute since we've gotten together. So it's good to jump back in, and what better way to get back into our indie game review show than talking about an indie game console called the Playdate. It's a little yellow square console. It kind of looks like a Game Boy, and it's made by Panic, and they're the ones who published a couple indie games that most people have heard of, Firewatch and Untitled Goose Game. And they're publishing several more in the next year. But yeah, they made this really interesting, cool handheld console. For those of you who haven't heard it, Marcus, maybe you could give us a rundown on like what makes this thing unique.
So if you saw someone like playing this on the bus, you might mistake it for a bright yellow Game Boy, but upon closer inspection, it is more square than a Game Boy. The screen is black and white. It's got the D-pad, it's got 2 buttons, and it's also got a crank. So that's kind of the main interesting selling point of this, is on the right side of this little portable Game Boy type thing is a little crank that you can spin clockwise and counterclockwise. And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a very unique flavor. I think they kind of went from the perspective of, okay, what hasn't been done? You know, what makes a handheld unique? Because, you know, with the Switch and the Steam Deck, you know, there's basically kind of been this merging of console and handheld games. But I feel like the Playdate is kind of their attempt at bringing back games that were meant specifically to be different, pared down a little bit, without the big fancy graphics, with a simpler control scheme, because there's only an A and B button and a D-pad. And then also, yeah, how can we make an experience that, like, no one's ever made a game that uses a crank before, right? As far as I'm aware, and sold it to a mainstream audience. So
yeah, the graphics, even though it's a non-backlit black and white screen, are actually like pretty high fidelity. It's kind of impressive the first time that you see it. Is high fidelity the right word for that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, high res. It has a really good resolution, and it's 1 bit. It's only black and white. You know, pixels are on or off, and yet they cram a ton of detail into it. And I'll take this chance to say also, my biggest concern when I purchased this, because I purchased it 1.5 years ago and it just shipped, is the lack of a backlight. I was like, wait, how is that even permissible today? Because I have a Game Boy I occasionally break out, and it's kind of fun. It's nostalgic to have to tilt it towards the light, but it's also, you know, kind of annoying. But I'm happy to say, once I got it, the lack of backlight hasn't bothered me at all. It's a really reflective screen, and so it's actually, you're able to see it pretty darn well, even in low-level lighting. Now, it certainly helps to sit next to a light source, but most places I've taken it, because I've taken it outside, I've taken it to work. Don't tell anyone.
Jared, it's not called a work date. Ba-da-ba-da.
Did you have any particular favorite apps or games on it that you enjoyed?
I mean, I'm a fan of gimmicks, and I feel like whole idea behind the Playdate is rather than trying to create like the ultimate device or like the perfect indie thing, it's like we just want to make something kind of interesting. And I feel like the best games are the ones that sort of just run with it. They're like, okay, so the crank makes you go fishing. There's one by the creator of Katamari Damacy that is going forward and backward in time, which is a lot of fun. There's also one that's called A Joke That's Worth 99 Cents, and the actual gameplay of it is you're bouncing this little guy with the bouncy butt on top of your
the crank, handle, right?
Right. So like the screen shows the crank as well as along with you moving it, and you're just trying to balance the guy on it.
Yeah, love those games, and what's really cool is how you receive most of those games. So when you buy this console, you receive a bunch of games, I think 24 of them, if I'm correct, but you get them only 2 at a time, and they upload onto your device through Wi-Fi every week. So every week you have 2 new games to look forward to. It sounds, odd to like lock off content, but actually you can download all of it at once if you want. But I personally really like having something new to look forward to each week and not knowing which game it's going to be or what it is.
Sure.
So one of them is that game you mentioned, Crankin's Time Travel Adventure, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And controlling time with the crank, I think, is a really, really smart way of showcasing how can a crank be used in a video game, right? There's also Whitewater Wipeout, where you're controlling a surfboard and you're trying to do 360 spins as fast as possible. Did you already mention that one? And those are really cool. They do bring up a little quick jab I have, though, which is that for these games that rely specifically on the crank, like for all of its gameplay, it's actually kind of hard to hold the Playdate in the other hand. Like I'll do a little like claw grip around the sides because the Playdate's pretty small, and crank it that way to hold it steady. But yeah, after a while my hand will cramp up.
Yeah.
I think online people have printed like 3D printer handles or something to make it a little easier. It's a very minor thing, but worth noting because some of these games are pretty lengthy. Some of them have 50 plus levels to them, which brings up another point. I think this is really not meant for long play sessions. It's really meant for just little small in-between games, right? Someone made a Yahtzee app for it, and I've ended up playing that one way more than I thought I would because it feels great to just pull it out, do a quick round, and put it away. People adapt a lot of card games to it and board games. There's like a Mahjong app called Sparrow Solitaire. It's very cool. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't try to be like most of the developers who've made stuff for this aren't trying to make these massive sprawling things because, one, it's a limited system. Like, it's kind of constraints catalyze creativity is kind of the idea behind a lot of it. But two, it's like if you wanted to play a more typical game, then you could have picked a more typical console. Like, this is kind of about the experience.
Exactly.
And actually, I would say, like a few other things in life, pickleball, My Little Pony, it's really something that you get into because of the community that surrounds it.
Absolutely.
Did you like how I connected those two things? Yes. I saw the look on your face. You didn't think I could pull that off.
No, yeah. The community is a big, big part of this. So the thing about the Playdate, for some people, this is the selling point. You can make games for it for free. It's open source, like the engine that you can code games for it is completely open source, and then you can just sell your own games on itch.io that people can sideload onto their Playdate. And there's no shenanigans involved with royalties or whatever. You just make what you want for it. They even have a web editor called Pulp, where people make a little more pared down, a little more basic, but again, just within your web browser, make a game for it, which I tried to do, but even that I found a little overwhelming. I've learned, wow, coding is a language. You really, really have to learn the ins and outs and how it works and get used to trial and error, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, if I had a star piece, it would be the community, because there's so many people that make really cool games for this, just on their own, just as a hobby, for this niche little black and white console. I'm on the Discord for it, and it's really fun to follow different people. They're very open about development. And one person in particular was making a game called Reelistic Fishing. and it's a fishing game for it, which, like you said, fishing games, how could you not make one?
A natural
the crank.
fit,
Yeah, it's so perfect, right? And, after following it for a while, I noticed, like, whenever someone just made a random community suggestion, even like just a really silly, absurd one, it usually ended up in the game. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I offered to do sound effects for because I haven't done sound design in a good long while. At work I usually edit voices, and anyway, long story short, I got to help out on the game, and ended up with my name in the credits, which was such an honor. But so did you, because you contributed to this game as well.
Yes, Toad, or Totally, hired me to write music for his game, and I gotta say, he was awesome to work with. He was a really excellent person to collaborate with. I think his game is really cute. Jared, did you say that there's a way to play Playdate games even if you don't have a Playdate? Is that true?
Yes, there's an app that, again, also free, and you can play it on your computer. Any PDX file, you can just drop it in and play it on your computer. The only caveat, the crank is done with a mouse. Like
most other systems don't have a crank, which is just so sad. Not the preferred way to experience these games, but the reason I ask is that means I can recommend people should try out the game without having to say, you should all buy a Playdate.
No, absolutely.
Might take a while to get, for one thing.
I hear it's a lot faster of a wait now. But yes, Reelistic Fishing is a game where you play as a fisherman, and you throw your line into the water, and then you control your hook. You pull up fish with the D-pad, and then you crank to go faster or slower with the crank. And you don't want to get too many fish because your line will snap, but you do want to get the really rare fish if you can. And then, once they come out of the water, you actually harpoon them manually using the crank to aim on your boat, which is very silly and very fun. And the game has a great loop of, selling the fish, getting money, upgrading your boat, upgrading your equipment. There's some really silly themes, which I will not spoil, that you can buy, that you may or may not recognize me doing sound effects with my voice. It's just a grand old time. And yeah, please go check it out. I will include a link to the game in the show notes. Oh, and of course, Marcus did an amazing job on the music. You're listening to some of the soundtrack right now. It's fantastic. If you're interested in seeing something that both of us worked on, please go check it out. If you want to support it, you can buy the game. And I actually just found out some of our listeners might be able to get a free code for the game if they're interested.
Whoa.
All you have to do is write in, tell me if you're planning on getting a Playdate, and even if not, if you want to try playing it on your computer, we might be able to hook you up with a free copy. So feel free to write in. And yeah, it was such a pleasure to work on it. I want to work on more games. It's cool to finally say, oh, I helped out on a little video game. I want to do that more going forward. I want to do that more with you, Marcus. I want to make a video game ourselves someday. It's kind of a pie in the sky dream, but I bet we could make it happen.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Well, before we wrap up the show, we owe it to our listeners to talk about some of the indie games they recommend to us. So let's get Rex. If you recall, we had a little giveaway to give out a code for Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, and in order to enter, you just had to tell us a game you think we should consider checking out on the show. And we got some great suggestions, so I'm actually going to play some of these trailers while we talk about them, Marcus. I'm going to share my screen with you.
Heck yeah.
One of them comes from Charles, who recommended Curse of the Sea Rats. So it kind of looks like a co-op 2D hand-drawn Metroidvania of sorts. Yeah. And I do like piratey things. Yeah. So that looks kind of fun. Thank you very much for that recommendation. The other one actually came from Toadley and said, I've had my eye on Bread and Fred for a bit now. Have you heard of Bread and Fred, Marcus? It looks very cute. So this is a co-op game, but you're both tethered to each other. Cute pixel art penguins. Yes, this is co-op. And I would very much like to play with you.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you for the recommendation, Toadley. And we got one more. This is from Cozy Louise, who actually guested on our show. So I guess she's still listening to our show, which is awesome. and she recommends Viewfinder. Have you heard of this one, Marcus? This one I have heard of.
Yes, I have. Yes, me as well.
Very cool. It kind of reminds me of, those other optical illusion games like
Liminal.
Yep, exactly, like Superliminal. But basically, a game where you take snapshots from your camera, and then you place it in front of you, and then it becomes a 3D diorama you can then walk onto that is to scale of how far away from your face you are holding it. It's in first person. Looks pretty cool. I think anyone who looks up a trailer will understand immediately kind of what this game is all about. The only hesitance I would have about this game is games like this tend to break my brain a little bit. And I don't know if I could handle another really cool first person 3D puzzle experience. But I will say some of the art styles on display here are pretty dang cool.
Yeah, it's honestly, I definitely want to try this one out as well. I agree though, like Superliminal at a certain point just is no longer feasible for lower life forms such as myself.
Sure.
But I could say the same thing about like Baba Is You. There's a certain point where it's like I can't anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't get through like even 4 levels of that. I had to stop. 2D and Top D as well, which we've recommended on the show, or you did. Thank you, Marcus. 2D and Top D is great. I'm in the final world, and it is. It is a mind-melting game. But anyway, Viewfinder looks great. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for recommending that as well. And to the rest of our listeners, if you have a suggestion, you are more than welcome to reach out. Let us know. We'll give our thoughts on it if we've played it. And if not, we'll live react to the trailer awkwardly. It'll be great. So Level With Us will be returning hopefully next week. We've got a couple amazing indie games that I absolutely recommend checking out that we will be talking about, including Sea of Stars, as well as Moonstone Island. So, keep it locked here.
Keep cranking.
And until next time, I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
And we'll level with you then. Please let us know what Playdate games you find cool, because I'm always looking for new recommendations. There's so many. People just churn them out.
People, sorry. People just crank them out. You missed that.
You're right.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, man. Shucks.